Hello, and welcome back to Reading Royale. I've been feeling really guilty during this book series because there are so many fantastic stories here, and I've really only been talking about the collection as a whole, and so I wanted to do something to address each of the pieces and the fantastic authors who wrote them. So what I'm going to be doing today is talking about my personal reactions to each of the pieces by just saying one thing that I really loved or appreciated about the piece, and then also giving a couple of my favorite quotes. I'm hoping that this will give you an idea of what each story is about and how you might use it in your classroom, or which readers you have in your classroom that you'd like to recommend these stories. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start with the first story in the collection and just go through them. So the first story is The Unhealthy Breakfast Club by Monica Rowe. What I loved about this story is how it highlights the ways other people and outside forces teach us about who we are to them and what we can do about it, especially that we can do something about it. So even if we don't agree with the way the outside world sees us, we don't have to leave it that way. There's something we can do about it. So two of my favorite quotes from this story were, "Only I didn't know I was supposed to be ashamed of where I come from until I landed in a school 2 counties over that might as well be another planet." And the second one is, "That's what John and his friends probably don't get. I bet it never occurred to them that someone could live in a trailer or be poor and just be a regular person." The next story in the collection is The Whole of Dark Kill Hollow by Rob Costello. This story highlights the complexity of humanity and that we are all more than one thing, and that we must reckon with that in order to not get sucked into the holes and voids we feel and see in our lives. So my favorite quote from this story is, "Yet the whole itself was stillness incarnate, a perfect circle of black, a void so pristinely empty, it didn't seem to swallow the light so much as defy its existence." A Border Kid Comes of Age is the next piece by David Bowles, and it showcases identity building through family stories and the stories we tell about ourselves, what we choose to share with ourselves and others, and how that gives us strength and courage to face whatever comes our way. This is very much an extension of his work in They Call Me Wero. My favorite lines from this piece were, "If there's one thing my family has taught me, it's that our struggles are difficult and never-ending, full of ups and downs, but we fight for what is right, no matter what. That's just who we are." The next piece, Fish and Fences, is by Veeda Bybee. She has 2 pieces in this collection. This one is a short story. The second one is a graphic short story. And this one deals with who we are now and are becoming, and is connected to the wares of our past and present. And that sometimes our kindness isn't really as kind as we think it is. Plus, there's some really great physical and situational comedy in this one. My favorite quote from this story was, "There's so much going on beneath the surface. Do we really know everyone's story unless we talk to people? I think about how fish can be a generous gesture to one and something triggering for another. I think about assumptions and ignorance and what happens when we speak up and what happens when we don't." The next story in the collection is Close Enough by Nora Shalaway Carpenter, and I covered this one more in the last video, but what I loved about this story was the way that it brings to light the complexities of feeling like you have a right to claim a place or don't have a right to claim a place. So if you're curious about that story, check out the previous video. The next story is Whiskey and Champagne by S.A. Cosby, and it highlights important intersections of race and class and place, where a working class black man is accused of stealing from his wealthy black employer. There's also this really important aspect of the story where it's the young person in the story that solves the mystery of who takes the watch or who took the watch and diffuses the situation, and that feels really important too, especially when you think about looking at things through a youth lens. One of my favorite quotes from this story was, "He was a black kid in a small southern town. Expectations were already being foisted upon him, both high and low, from multiple corners." The next piece is another poem, What Home Is by Ashley Hope Perez. And it speaks to the complexities of simultaneously loving and hating where you're from, and it's written in beautiful verse, made from a mix of sensory images and language. There were lines that absolutely devastated me, and lines that lifted me up right out of my chair. It was a perfect meeting of form and content. It was so good. Some of my favorite lines were, "Home is your hands thrown out wide, as if you could hold every precious and awful thing washed up here and left behind. Home is learning that you get to love this place and leave it. Home is learning that you can leave it and come back if you want to. Home is you. Home is always you." The next story is Island Rodeo Queen by Yamile Saied Mendez. And it highlights the pains and challenges of growing into our many layers of who we are, especially when the place around us may or may not be ready for us. My favorite quote from this story was, "Girls, even girls like us, aren't like fabric or leather. We aren't cut out to be or not to be anything. We're like water and light. You can fit into any spaces you want to fit into, okay?" The next story is a graphic short story by Randy DuBurke called Grandpa. And this really highlights how people and places never really leave us, and how the people who make fun of that just mock what they don't understand. One of my favorite things about this story wasn't so much, I mean, I loved the dialogue and I loved the interaction between characters, but the illustrations were just as lovely and gritty as the story they tell. The next piece in the collection is a short story called Best in Show by Tirzah. And it showcases two characters working against place-based assumptions to form important relationships. And they sort of navigate the narratives of outsiders. So like what, small towns think of, queer folks and Latinx folks, or what outsiders perceive small towns to think about queer folks and Latinx folks. And they navigate that to cope with their visibility in a small town in order to find happiness. And I absolutely love Herbert the Pig's role in the story. My favorite quote from this one is, "I had no idea what I was walking into when we first moved here. All my friends thought I was going to be bullied at best and shot on some backcountry road at worst." And I just feel like that quote really highlights the heart of that story. Praise the Lord and Past the Little Debbies by David McGinnis Gill is a story that absolutely broke my heart. As a dog lover, as a human being, for a story with religion as a focus, there really isn't much redemption, which I kind of think is the point. But it does highlight our ability to choose our hard. My favorite quote from this one is, "Kobe opened the front door. On the threshold, he hesitated at the sounds of his mama's and daddy's angry voices. Then, without looking back, he went inside. He closed the door behind him, and the latch softly clicked shut." The Cabin by Nasugraq, Rainey, Hopson is a fantastic story about rural feminism and how strong and competent and capable even young rural women are. And my favorite quote from this, all of these quotes I picked kind of too because they sort of capture what the story or what the piece is about and what it offers. So my favorite from this one was, "Not many women trapped fur-bearing animals in the Arctic, and an even smaller number of teenage girls trapped, maybe one or two across the whole region every other generation. My male cousins had complained about a girl taking over this part of my Appa's trap line, though they clearly thought that it would only be a temporary phase, like the year I had bright blue hair. But I loved trapping, and I loved a challenge, and I knew what it took to be a trapper full-time." The next piece is a short story by Shae Carys, a Hoosier, Indiana, called Black Nail Polish. This story importantly highlights the difficulty of getting medical care in a small place and figuring out who we are in relation to our bodies, our places and the people in our lives. My favorite quote from this one is, "The bell rings before I can say anything else. Lauren stands and leaves me outside to reel at what she said. I've been so busy faulting her for not being there for me with this joint thing, for not being a good friend, but maybe, have I been a bad friend?" The next piece is Secret Menu by Veeda Bybee, and this is a pretty short graphic style short story, and this one is so good. Who doesn't love a granny spicing things up in her small town through food and cultural exchange? And the illustrations are absolutely delightful. My favorite quote from this one is Granny says, "Can I order from the secret menu? I need some excitement in this small town." And it just made me giggle with recognition. The next piece is an essay called Pull Up a Seat Around the Stove by Joseph Bruchac. I really love the way that the prose and poetry speak to one another in this essay. It was a super, super interesting way to see how Bruchac's life shaped his writing. And my favorite quote from this one is, "But what's even more clear to me now, looking back on all those years of my rural childhood, is how much the person I became was shaped by that place. I know that wherever I've gone, wherever I travel, Bowman's store has been and always will be in my heart." And then the final piece in the collection is called Home Waits by Estelle Laure, I think is how you say her last name. I'm so sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. I love this story. I love the ghosts in this story. Even though Sonny never met Georgia O'Keeffe, Millicent Rogers, or Mabel Dodge Lewin, their connection to Taos, New Mexico connected them to her and her to Taos while she was away. And the tension here between whether or not you can aspire to and achieve greatness in a small town feels so visceral in the story. My favorite quote from this one is Sonny's mom is talking to her and she says, "Your body always knows when you're in the right place. And if you're paying attention, it'll tell you when you're in the wrong one until you listen." I thought that was really important. I like that quote a lot. And then at the end of the collection, after all of the stories, there's an About the Contributors section, which is fantastic. These are so awesome, and by far one of my favorite things about this collection, because each author talks about their personal connections to rural places, and there's a lot of encouragement for rural folks to realize that it's more than okay to be and to claim your rural identity. And so I would highly suggest that you make sure that students don't skip that. So I know that that was like a super rapid way, rapid fire way to go through each of these pieces, but I just wanted to give each of the writers a shout out and to sort of talk a little bit about what was in each of the pieces and give you a little bit of a taste of what the writing is like in each of the pieces. So hopefully you find that helpful. Next week, I hope that you join us again. That video will detail some teaching ideas for this text and will be paired with my first ever author talk with Nora Shalaway Carpenter, where you can listen to her talk about everything from her rural upbringing to her writing life. We talk about a lot of different stuff. So make sure that you check both of those out. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss them, then I would suggest and encourage you to subscribe to this channel. That way you don't miss a beat. And just thank you for being here and for checking this out. And y'all come back now, would ya?